welcome everyone and thank you for joining us to our first virtual Women in IT meetup. We did our first Women in IT get together with this WhatsApp community in London in March. Just before lockdown, and it was such a huge success. We really wanted to do more stuff over the summer in Manchester and different regions, but obviously due to recent events we can't do it, but we didn't want to wait, so we thought we'd crack on with a virtual activity. So we're joined today by Caroline Whyatt from PRS for Music. She is the Head of Digital Innovation and Experimentation, and I'm ever so envious of that job title. And she's going to answer all our questions today, burning questions that we've got prepared for her on women in technology, and share some of her thoughts and opinions and experiences. Helen Crowther, who's our Women in IT ambassador, is going to be asking all the questions and giving her a good grilling. There will be some time at the end if anybody does have any comments or questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll make sure we make time for those at the end. If we can just all make sure everybody stays on mute throughout the chat, and if it's only me on video as well anyway, but I'll pop that off so that we've got no technical issues and it all runs super smoothly. So yeah, that's it for introductions. Enjoy everybody, and over to Helen and Caroline.
Brilliant, thank you. So Caroline, let's make a start. So can you share a little bit about what it is that you do and what a typical day looks like for you?
So at the moment, I joined PRS at the beginning of September last year. So we're still kind of in the early stages. It's a relatively new role, and there were a few sort of foundation pieces that were a bit more sort of basic than the big innovation experimentation piece. So we wanted to get the foundations right to start with. So part of my team is on the product side. So I have a couple of lead product owners and a junior product owner on that side. I've got a UX UI designer, DevOps platform engineer, and then two technical leads that have a couple of people working from them underneath them, one on the back-end development .NET side, and the other our CMS is Cycle. So that's the kind of skill set I span. But we've just had a huge program ending, PDP program, developing a number of new products. So part of the role is looking at where that program left off on the product development and carrying those products on into a continuous improvement piece. And that's one of the areas that I've kicked off in the team. Products were very much sort of left at the end of the project and not much happened afterwards. So we're looking at that agile product development, continuous improvement piece within the team. Standard day, gosh, I'm not sure there is one. I sit on some project boards that for projects that my team work on. So we look at the entire piece, both from the features and functionality through to the commercials and budget side of things. At the moment, I've got a team of 13, so there's quite a lot around the team, pastoral care. PRS are amazing that they're very good from the mental health perspective. So we've been very conscious to keep the team engaged, keep meeting up as a team. So I have every day at 10:30, I have a coffee meeting, and the team come and, we don't necessarily chat about work, but I think that's very beneficial, especially for the people that live on their own as well. So yeah, I think that covers quite a lot of bases of the role.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. So obviously you've had a number of positions before your role in PRS, but what led you into technology initially?
My initial thought was that I was very lucky when I left or was leaving university. There were a couple of students that had gone to work for a software development company in Henley. I was at university in Reading, and they advertised for somebody to come in and help with some branding work, because I did a typography degree, so basically graphic design. So they wanted someone to come in over the summer holidays and help with implementing a new brand across the business. And I got chatting to them, and they'd advertised the role before Easter, so I ended up going in early over the Easter holidays. Really loved the role, started getting involved in some interface design work, and they were quite leading edge at the time because interface designs as we know them really weren't a thing. It was quite sort of a bit like DOS, Windows-based system, and their USP was to bring that design and really early on human computer interaction, user experience piece into it. And when I finished my summer just before my final year at university, they offered me a job for when I finished. So my initial thing is that I was very lucky and kind of fell into it. But then I was actually thinking perhaps it was more of the planets aligning, because thinking back, even when were they the pet computers at school, the real huge things? When the BBC computers came out, I remember getting a BBC Acorn Electron for Christmas one year, and was really into the Acorn Electron magazines where you typed in these programs to draw things on the screen. And I also did GCSE computer studies. So yeah, lucky, but I think it was maybe an interest that was there. It definitely was an interest that was there anyway.
It's interesting that you say lucky, because I can resonate quite a lot with your response, because I think mine would be quite similar. And yet other people within our community would say it was all their hard work. But we do tend, as women, I think, to always think it's luck, and it isn't. You know, we work hard for what we do.
I think that's very true, and I think probably thinking about the roles that I went on to do, again, I would say sort of right time, right place, or luck, or whatever, rather than, well, I had all the necessary skills and experience, so of course I was the choice.
So what do you think has been your biggest learning opportunity?
I think I've been really lucky that at a handful of points in my career, I ended up taking roles that were quite a pivot. So rather than doing the same thing and sort of working up within a certain area. So when I left my first role as a interface designer, basically at the software company, I got a really I was put in touch with a recruitment consultant who had this fantastic role at digital agency Rufus Leonard, and that really took me from into digital internet. That was quite a step change for me, and I also went from hands-on being a designer to then being a project manager, and so that was kind of one pivot. And then other roles, so I actually lived in Dubai for 6-7 years, and my second role in Dubai, I was head of digital role, and it went from previously I'd been more project management, but it took me into a more wide-ranging role, you know, looking at disaster recovery and working with developers. My development company was actually in Canada, so that was quite a sort of series of challenges there. And then probably another pivot came when I went to work for Heineken, because Heineken was a startup incubator. It was Digital Commerce Europe, and so we worked across Europe, but they were, you know, startup style in a WeWorks, but very product focused and also completely agile. They had no historical software that they had to integrate with, and so you could really do agile DevOps properly, and I learned a lot from that. So yeah, a series of kind of key pivots.
Brilliant, thank you. what do you think the biggest challenge will be for the next generation of women?
I don't think we're on a level playing field yet. And so I think the challenge for us and the next generation is to get us to that level playing field. We were just chatting about this as people were joining in sort of thinking and preparation for this chat. I was mulling over role models, and you hear the names of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt, and many others bandied around as these key leaders and sort of historical people within the development of IT. You never hear women's names mentioned. And so I was thinking, well, is that because there aren't women, or is it because they're just not heard of? And it's really interesting, Googling, and you come up with Ada Lovelace, first computer programmer, a couple of ladies, Adele Goldberg and Suzanne Cain, who were really leading lights within Apple, developing the Apple icons, developing the GUI interfaces as we know it. The person that invented GPS was also a lady. We don't hear about them. Why not? And I mean, we were chatting about this before. I think that women don't have that sort of male bravado that gets them out there. And I think those ladies were probably quietly working behind the scenes, pulling these things together, but not going around shouting about it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, fabulous. So how do you think we as women in tech now become strong role models for women in tech in the future?
I think we need to do that shouting, not just for ourselves, but also for each other, and really support people. And I noticed that there was a group on LinkedIn, ladies, I think something like leading ladies in IT, and doing things like that, I think that really shares awareness. And also actions speak louder than words. So, go out there. And one of my key things actually is have confidence. I think part of lacking in that male bravado is the confidence piece. And I can see that both from things that I've done and the way I've felt, and when I've looked at job ads. And then I also was listening to a podcast back in the days when we were commuting, and I can't remember who it was, and I went to try and find it and couldn't find it, but they were talking about why is it that women don't have these roles. And they were saying, again, back to the confidence and the way we look at things. We look at job spec and think, I've got to tick absolutely every piece of experience and every requirement in that job description, where I think guys look at 60% of it, look at the job title and the salary and go, hey, I can do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think that's about where we need to change women's mindsets, if we can, don't we? To say, you can do these roles, there are massive opportunities, and you don't have to sit there and necessarily be a coder. There are so many roles in the tech industry.
Absolutely. That was the other thing, people probably conjure up the fact that you've got to sit there being a developer, writing lines of code. In my team, the development side is, I don't know, probably about half of it. We've got the product side, we've got the UX UI piece, project managers, product analysts. There's so much more that doesn't involve you writing code.
Absolutely. That's very, very similar to my team setup as well. So what do you think for you is the best thing about being a woman in the tech industry?
I mean, I love the industry, and I think some of the roles that I've done have enabled me to fulfill this, that you can do things that make a difference. So one of my projects when I worked at Royal Mail was to redesign the track and trace application. That's used by everybody in the UK at least once a year. So hopefully doing that right, and also listening to users and feeding back and making changes can really make a difference to people. And it's so exciting. There's so much that we're able to do now with technology. We just bought a watering system and it's got a mobile app control on it. You know, who would have thought that we would have been able to do these things 15 years ago? And being part of that is really exciting.
What are your thoughts on the next transformation in the tech industry?
I mean, it's obviously a hot topic at the moment, but I think the impact of COVID is going to be a huge, bigger than any other. You know, there's obviously a lot of businesses that came out of the last recession, Uber, there's a whole list of them. I think COVID, because of the nature of it, is going to have a far bigger impact than anything else. And just the fact that we're doing this now, the fact that the kids are doing lessons over Teams. And in my industry, we're starting to look at what the new normal is going to be. And it's becoming more and more apparent that although there's a lot of concerts that are free now, there was Meerkat Music and Take That last Friday, the free concerts are only going to go on for so long because people are going to need to start making some money. And so I think the next step is going to be either online music, online concerts, where either it's an actual venue but with no audience, or it's going to be a venue with 30% of the audience, but that gig is streamed as well. And so I think COVID is going to really fast track some of the things that maybe would have been taken 20 years to go digital. And it's going to force that, and offline experiences that you would never have dreamed could have been digitized.
Yeah, I think the transformation is going to be quite amazing, isn't it? Because like you say, we've got to find a new normal.
Yeah. And people are saying, you know, that things aren't going to go back to normal until there's a vaccine. So at the moment, we don't quite know how long that is. And the longer it is, the more transformation is going to happen from necessity.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. What do you think young women need to know or hear to consider a career in the tech industry?
I think, as we've touched on already, it's really important to realise that it isn't just about writing lines of code.
Yeah.
And there's so much variety in there. And also not just variety in the skill sets, but variety in the projects and the companies you can work in. You know, I've worked at O2, I've worked at Heineken. It's been a completely different industry, and that's been really interesting to get my head around. I think they also need to realise that you don't need a computer science degree or similar to have to be able to work in IT. You know, there's people in my team that have got design degrees and they're developers. One of the guys has got an MA in English language, huge wealth of different areas. But they also then all add into the whole IT side of things. Yeah, so don't think that you can't do it because of either your past qualifications or skills. You know, it's quite wide open.
Great, thank you. We talk quite a lot as women in tech and in other industries, obviously, about imposter syndrome. What would you to say to somebody if they thought they had imposter syndrome? So
I guess if you're thinking you've got imposter syndrome, you're in a situation where you think you're not right now, or you haven't got the right experience. That means that you are on a project, in a new role. Somebody has made the decision to put you in that new situation. So somebody has already seen something in you and believes in you. So I think you should very much take that and realise that it's not. I don't think generally you would have put yourself in that situation on your own. And also, I think, again, we were talking about this before, I can't think of a male that has actually admitted that they've got imposter syndrome. A few people have said that to me, and they've all been women. So again, back to the confidence. Have confidence in yourself. I remember when I started my role at AME in Dubai and had a fantastic manager there, and I can't remember what I'd said and at what point in the process I'd said it, or he'd said this to me. I think part of my role was looking after the campaign management team, and I hadn't got any experience in that at all. And he said to me, well, everybody needs something new in a new role when you move into it. And it did really make me think, well, yeah, what's the point in going and doing the same job again or the same project again? Everyone needs to stretch themselves and keep the brain going.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I always say to myself, you know, if I'm not learning something new every day or week, what am I still doing in that role? We should be continuously learning, because that's what makes our roles exciting.
And don't people say that, you know, you should put yourself in an uncomfortable situation at least once a day?
I think we do that all the time, don't we? What's the best advice you've ever been given in your career?
I think it's interesting. I can think of a lot of really bad advice I've been given, or really bad comments. I think the big one was actually Ziad saying, you know, everybody needs to learn something in a new role, and that you shouldn't be ticking every box that you've honestly done something every time you go in.
Fabulous, thank you. What have you learned that you wish you'd known at the start of your career? This is opening up a box of all sorts here.
I think I wish I'd known or learned to be more confident and not to take things personally that people say. Really big example springs to mind. Appraisal in my first job, and it was my manager and then her manager, who was the director of the company. And we were doing this sort of personal development, career development piece. And it was a bit of a what do you want to do when you grow up sort of question. And I said, I'd like to be a project manager. And he turned around and he said, everyone has their dreams. And it really, really got to me. And then when I became head of project management for the internet side at O2, I was a bit like, there, you see, could do it.
Fabulous. That's amazing. Thank you. Shall we open it up to the audience for any other questions?
Easy ones, please.
Who's going to be first?
I've got a bit of a random one, if I'll ask it, but you may or may not have a good answer for it. Really, it is a bit random. I've got two girlfriends that work not in. One of them does work in tech, and one of them works in a sales role, in a slightly digital business, digital media and things like that. And both of them have got horrific CEOs or directors, and I mean probably a sociopath of some description, just like really cruel, shouts, says nasty things in front of people. And I don't think it's necessarily just a female thing. I think that's probably somewhat who they are. And both of my friends are pretty senior as well. So there's no excuse for it, not that there ever is, in terms of,
you know, that they're not competent or whatever the excuse could be. I just wondered, like, do you ever come up against people at work where you're not the problem and you know you're not, they are, but then it's tricky to find a balance between defending yourself and then being called defensive, biting your lip, but then not feeling like you'd actually put your point across, while still you know that that person ultimately is the one that signs off the promotions and the pay rises?
I guess it probably depends on what level it is. I think if it was really, really bad, I'd be a bit like, life's too short. You know, don't jump ship without another role to go to. But equally, not every company is the same. And so I have had experience of that, you know, people like that and direct managers being like that. And, you know, if it is really bad and it's really stressing you out, then, yeah, look for something else. And I think that's probably, in terms of advice, one of the things I wish I'd known about not taking things personally, not getting really wound up about things and letting them really affect me, but not needlessly walking, but actually also not putting up with it. It depends on the scale of how it is. If it's sort of, you don't have to interact, you know, if it is the CEO and you don't have to interact with them that often, then I guess maybe you can grin and bear it, but make sure you do in some way try and get your point across.
One of them's on the board, so it's like her direct report. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It is a difficult one, because ultimately you should walk away if they're making your life a misery, don't you? But it's kind of difficult as well at the same time. But
yes,
yeah.
I mean, especially current situation, it's not always easy just to walk into something else, and roles when you do get more senior, that there's not all the variety and something being right for you that there is maybe when you start your career.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes, I guess maybe if there are other people in the same situation, you might be able to pool tips of if anyone's had any successful tactics on how to manage these people. Sometimes I did work with somebody who liked to rant, and you just kind of let him go. So if you made a point and then you got met with a rant back, you let him go. And then if you let him go, you could then go back and make the point again, and he would actually take it on board. So it might be that there could be some techniques specific to that person that could be employed.
Yeah, like how to manage your manager training.
Yes. Could you just sign this training request off?
I know, can you imagine? I'm sure there's something on the internet.
LinkedIn training, actually, and there's also, we have Pluralsight at work if people have access to it, is really good. But when I've been looking at changing roles, I have upgraded to the LinkedIn Premium, and the training on there is fantastic. So if you need to do something yourself, then that's a really good port of call.
Yeah, thank you. And Olivia, just so you know, that wasn't me pretending to be like my friend as a horrible manager.
That was my next question. Is this an inverted commas? I've got a friend.
Yeah, Ed's been beating me up online for months.
To be fair, Beth, I can advocate Pluralsight as well. That's one of the first things I did when I took on this role, was get my team Pluralsight licenses. So that would be a really good recommendation to your friends. And there's usually at least a 10-day free trial.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've not used that one. I've seen LinkedIn training, but I've not seen Plural. So yeah, I'll have a look. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, it's Leah.
Hi there.
Hi. When you're choosing your mentors, or people that, when you say, I don't know, you've had a mentor, if you've had people that have had impacts on your career, would you say that you gravitate towards a female mentor or a male mentor? Do you think it makes a difference? Because I think both would bring different aspects to it. But I almost I'm thinking, well, do I want a guy because then I can be more like a guy and he can help me with that? Or do I want a female mentor because they'll teach me to be my true self without having to change? So I don't know, that's kind of my thinking on mentors at the moment. I wondered what your experience has been.
That's a really interesting question. I haven't had a formal mentor. I have had people that have probably, to an extent, at a time and a place, acted that role with me, people that I've gelled with. It's a good question on whether it should be a guy, because it's almost an insight on how guys think. And that depending on the areas that you want to develop, that could be a really interesting slant, almost sort of seeing things through their eyes. Women often get told that they're too emotional, which is possibly something that, or not to take things personally, which is feedback that you probably would get from a guy and not necessarily another woman. And there's a couple of ladies I work with at Royal Mail, and they were phenomenal. And sort of in terms of role models, and I'm still in touch with both of them now. I just think, they live at the opposite end of the country. They've got children. They're like Superwoman, really, and one of them especially is so ambitious, and she just takes things on, and you can see the next role with her name written on it, and so she's been a really good person for me to talk to, even now. But yeah, I haven't gone down the sort of more formal, longer term mentoring role. But I like the idea of the seeing things through a guy's eyes.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So Caroline, I don't know if you can see the chat, but Kate's just popped a question in the chat just to say, how can we ultimately get more women a seat at the table in the tech industry?
Gosh, that's a big question. I think that communicating upwards, sideways and downwards, we need to highlight the issue. I had my one-to-one with my manager on Monday, and it was the first time I told him that I was doing this chat. And so we kind of battered the breeze about few situations that a couple of ladies at work have spoken to me about recently. And so I think, he might not have necessarily even thought about those scenarios. So yeah, vocalizing how we see, the issues that we see, is the start of it. And I think we also do need to get involved, back to the point about the Eric Schmidt and Bill Gates, etc. Even though it might make our toes curl and we'd rather just sit there or work away and deliver the project or whatever it is. Yeah, get involved and start shouting about things.
I've got another question then. Why do you think that there's less women on the board across the UK? And that's kind of extensive across all sectors, really, not just tech.
It is. I mean, I think if people have a family, back to it still not being a level playing field now, generally women have taken time out to have children, so that possibly puts them back a bit. Then when they do go back, you're still juggling an awful lot more balls than the guys are, even if you do have partners and husbands that help. And so maybe you're put off from putting yourself in senior positions because of that juggling. And there could also be an element of unconscious bias if the CEO's a male and he's choosing his board, etc. So at PRS, we got a new CEO last June, just before I joined, Lady Andrea Martin. There was one lady already on the board, and then we've just recruited a female chief people officer. So it's quite interesting that actually there's suddenly quite a lot of women that have come in there, and you can see there's quite a different way of doing things.
Yeah, agreed. I thought it was those two things as well, like maybe family and a bit of unconscious bias. We did do some unconscious bias training with the managers last year, and it got a lot of reaction from the audience, shall we say. So I think it's probably a topic that we need to continue training on.
Absolutely. I've done that as well, and it really does make you think, even down to people being almost kind of discriminated against for having a Hotmail account rather than something a bit more modern like a Gmail account.
Oh, that'd be me, girl.
Same here. I've had it for 20 years.
It's the NCL world. It's even older.
Yours might get decommissioned, Helen, one day, and you'll have nothing left.
I'm just showing my age.
My grandma's email address got decommissioned. I don't know what she was using. But yeah, thank you.
Caroline, it's Hayley here.
Hello.
Hiya. Did you find it hard getting promoted in the IT world against in comparison to your male counterparts, or did you see any of that maybe in the early stages or latter stages of your career?
I feel it's quite difficult to get promoted within a business. I think you often have to go somewhere else in order to do that. And I think especially earlier on in my career, there were a lot of not old boys networks, but guys being quite cliquey, and they're kind of cliquey friendship groups. And it wasn't quite sort of who played golf, but it was that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do see it. And I also still think there is, even for the same level roles, a gender pay gap as well. My husband works in IT, and I can see it with what, sometimes we've done really similar roles, and I can see with what we've both been paid. So yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Caroline. It's Olivia. Like I said in the introduction, got job title envy because it just sounds super cool. Your current job role, and just speaking about your past experience and career experience, you've had some really interesting roles. What would your dream role be? The one where you're like, if I got that, then that's it, I'm done, I'll never top that.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. And this is one of the things I was actually going to say. I've been shocking at having a career development plan. Actually, I've never really had one. So haven't really got that visionary job role. It's more when the time has arisen, sort of looking and thinking about things then. It would definitely be in a business where I could make a difference. I've always mulled over, would you want to go and work in a business like a really slick digital business like a Google or an Amazon that do some great stuff, but equally you're a sort of digital cog in this really well-oiled machine. And I'm not sure that's the sort of business that I'd want to go into. I think moving up to look after a wider remit in an interesting industry, and in something that is a bit underdeveloped, that you could take your past skills and experience into and make a difference. But yeah, haven't necessarily got a sort of set job title. Maybe something like a product and innovation director or something.
Okay, have we got any more questions?
No, I think that's all. Have you got any questions for us, Caroline? Back to A&S.
It would be interesting. Are there any particular challenges people feel they have being females in the IT industry? You know, some of the conversations I've had with people internally have been around how can I make my voice heard, and about people passing ideas off as the ladies. You know, have you seen that sort of thing? Have you experienced other challenges?
I think for me, working as a development manager, one of the major challenges, and this isn't necessarily within A&S, this is across my career, is earning the respect of obviously the male side of the business, especially if you're heading up a team of developers, for example, where the majority will always be men. It's how to get that balance so that you earn their respect, because you don't necessarily walk in and just get it. Whereas, this sounds really feminist, I don't mean it to, but sometimes if a male walks into that role, they've immediately got that respect. Whereas I think as a female in that sort of managerial role, you've got to earn it from day one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, and I think maybe it's back to the sort of male confidence bravado piece as well. That maybe that whole confidence piece then instills confidence in the people around them, whereas we have to quietly beaver away and prove ourselves more.
Yeah, I agree.
Has anyone else got any observations around those sort of areas?
I don't personally. I think it's Olivia again, and I am on the board of directors at A&S, and I'm the only female on there as well. And maybe, you know, really interesting listening about your answer to Leah's question around mentors. And all my mentors, I've had one formal one, and he was chosen purely from a marketing perspective. So he was the managing director of a marketing consultancy. So it was nothing to do with gender or anything like that. It was purely based on experience and who could give me the insight into you know the best marketing experience. But yeah, all my bosses have been male, and all my mentors have been male. So maybe you know, I've kind of, you know, grown up in my career in that environment. But yeah, things like, you know, pitching ideas and stuff, I think I probably do have a male approach to it, and I'll go, oh, that was me, and I'll jump in, and I will, you know, have that kind of banter level with them, and just, you know, but say it and it's me, and make sure that they're aware. But yeah, I don't know whether that's me as a person or me having been influenced through, you know, previous bosses and mentors and things like that. You know, you just don't know, do you? It's like chicken and egg. But it's
funny. I had two bits of the answer when somebody asked me about what I would do about ideas pinching. Yeah, my first answer was exactly that, and it used to be quite sarcastic. I think maybe I'm not quite as sarcastic anymore, but I would say, oh, that was your idea, was it? Really interesting. Where did that stem from then? Yes, or and the other bit of the answer was maybe to inject some background that made it obvious where the idea had come from. So you know, I'd been thinking about this idea when I observed blah, and so yeah, make others realize that it was your idea.
Yeah.
That sounds like good advice to me. And I think for me, one of the big challenges is I am more comfortable managing down than I am managing up. So that's one of the things I want to be able to develop for my future career. And, you know, that example with idea pinching, etc., is a prime example of if you've got the confidence to then manage up, you're not necessarily in that situation.
Yes, because it could actually be your manager doing the idea pinching rather than a peer.
Both of you, thank you very much for answering all the questions and having a really open and honest conversation. And yeah, it's definitely sparked some things with me. So hopefully it's sparked some inspiration and some people have taken some little nuggets away from that as well. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, Helen, for hosting, and thank you everybody else for joining us.